Good afternoon, everyone. You are very, very welcome to the first in our Climate Action and Sustainability Lunchtime Lecture Series held here in Trinity College, Dublin. I hope that you can join us, not just for today, but throughout the series. We've got a great range of speakers lined up over the coming months. This is really, I suppose, a way for us to share what we do with those in the greater community and to understand what is going on in Trinity. So really it's a sharing knowledge and perspectives and addressing national and global challenges. That's what this series is about, but obviously a clear focus on the role of ourselves in climate action and sustainability. Part one, you've probably visited the website since you've registered, is a four-parter from now until the 1st of March, but we have a subsequent 8 that we're going to release the details over the next week or so. So stay tuned from March 15th on into April, May. We've got 8 additional speakers from a variety of different fields within Trinity to share their knowledge and their perspectives in this important space. So just to contextualize, and each of our speakers throughout the series will maybe have these 2 slides in their deck to start off around climate action. And this is essentially some of the national priorities and high impact areas defined by the Climate Action Plan 2023. So it's really, what we're trying to do is show that what we do in our teaching and our research links clearly and directly to supporting the Climate Action Plan and educating people, but also to address more global aspects around our sustainable development goals. Now, in Trinity, I think is through education, but our active work has clear links to individual or multiple different SDGs. So Brian might have a little bit just to contextualize where he's coming from in terms of supporting national and international goals. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Professor Brian Caulfield, who is a colleague from the Department of Civil Structural and Environmental Engineer and is currently our head of department within Trinity. So Brian's coming from a transport background to start the series and has contributed to many different reports and strategies in Ireland and worked with key stakeholders in the space of trying to support decarbonising transport, and also has spoken to the Citizens Assembly and various other important groups nationally to try and share what his views and experiences have led him to certain conclusions around how we approach this significant challenge. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, hand over to Brian, and please, if you have questions during his presentation, add them to the Q&A or to the chat, and in about half an hour, when Brian comes to an end, we will come to the questions and allow you to pose them to him. So Brian, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And transport, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, John. Just quickly to make sure you can see the slides and you can hear me okay?
That's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So welcome everybody. It's a great pleasure to kick off this series. A massive thank you to John. I think he does great work and he's a great colleague, and I think this series is very much kind of the thing that John does. He brings people together and he gets our message out there, and he does stellar work across the university, so he deserves a lot of thanks for that. As John said, I'm the head of civil engineering, and it's great in that role to see this type of series. And I know the colleagues of mine that are going to speak to you later on in this series are all excellent researchers and are all doing amazing work in climate action. I'm coming to you today from Monaghan. I'm speaking at an event in about 2 hours, I think, on the Irish regions and how we strengthen our regions. And one of the key parts of that is transportation, and that's what I am here to talk to you about this afternoon. So cutting transport emissions by 51%. I'm going to start off with an apology to John. Yes, I remember the slides. Yes, I should have done it. No, I didn't do it. But my area of research is obviously on mobility. And it also looks at the kind of the SDGs around climate action, sustainable cities, also poverty as well, because I do quite a bit of work on climate justice and just transition. So the current transport emissions in Ireland, last Christmas, just before Christmas, the minister came out and he launched the climate action plan for 2023. And the key thing he said it about 5 times, that transport emissions are going to be difficult, and he's 100% right. Our sector in transport will probably be one of the most hardest to decarbonize, and that's for a number of reasons. The first one I think is mainly because where people live and where they work changes very rarely. So you're stuck into that system of how you get to and from work and your activities around that. And that doesn't change often, so that makes transport emissions very difficult to reduce. These are the basic statistics that I think I always have at the start of any of my presentations around transport. It's a large area of greenhouse gas emissions. 94% of it is taken up by road transport. About 60% is from passenger cars. And I think the most startling statistic that I think at least is in 2019, about 75% of all of our trips were taken by car. So it's reversing that. It's reversing a very car-centric country that we have, a motorway network that's been built to enable us to use all of these cars. Is one of the things that a lot of my research and work looks to find ways to reduce. So this is a slide from the Climate Action Plan that was, or it's taken from the Climate Action Plan. And these are the kind of 3 pillars of transport policy, and they've been developed by many others, and they've been adapted now into the Climate Action Plan. And it is nice to see them in there. They're around avoiding, so reducing the need to travel, shifting, moving on to more environmentally friendly modes of transport. And then finally improving. So improving your technology, improving your vehicle technologies. So I'm going to talk about each of the 3 of these different kind of pillars of decarbonization of transport policy with reference to some of the research that I've been undertaking in the area. But before I start into that, one of the key things is, and it's one of the things that I teach in transport modeling and any of the transport courses that I teach in Trinity, and it's a key thing for anybody that's looking to come and learn in our School of Engineering, is how do you collect all this information? How do you make sure that it's right? And how do you plan for better? And that goes across every different sector as far as I'm concerned. So just in the 3 areas of avoid, shift, improve, these all come from the Climate Action Plan, as I said. The first one is around avoid, and this is a reduction of 20% of all passenger car vehicle kilometers and a 50% reduction in fuel usage. Massively challenging targets out to 2030 that we've been given. And how do we do this? And how do we measure taking 20% of our car fleet out and 20% of our kilometers out of our network? Then on the improve and shifting to more sustainable modes, a lot of the statistics here are huge. So 130% increase in the daily number of public transport trips is massive. 50% increase in daily active modes of transport. To achieve these by 2030 will be by bus measures primarily. There are no light rail systems or no massive rail infrastructure that's going to be built to facilitate this 130%. So it is bus transport is what will be required towards the end of the decade. And that's hiring probably maybe 4,000 extra bus drivers. It's also maybe at least another 2,000 buses. So these challenges and these targets are real, and they will be very difficult to achieve. And then finally on the improve, I'm quite vocal about the improve and why I'm not necessarily a big fan of what's in here, but in here it is, and that's a 1 million electric vehicle target to be hit by 2030. And this is by passenger cars, by low emission buses, which I'm a big fan of, and heavy goods vehicles, so decarbonizing the sector that way. More about that later. So again, back to how we collect this data. So we work very closely in our department with the National Transport Authority. We have for very many years. Before they were called the National Transport Authority, we would have worked with the Dublin Transportation Office. The Simon Perry, who our civil engineering building is named after, would have been very, very active working with the DTO, delivering the first strategies for the city. As is our current chair, Professor Margaret O'Mahony. She would have been very active in researching with the NTA and with the DTO how better to improve our transport. But in this map here, you can see how we break down the country into different modeled regions. And the region that I work the most with is the Eastern Regional Model. In the 5th year of our course and on our MSc in Transport, the NTA come in and give a lot of lectures on this material. On how we collect this information. So I'm going to give you kind of a snapshot of kind of the stuff that we cover in that module, which is also a micro-credential. So the speed version of this basically is it's the crystal ball that we develop. It's the model that is developed by the NTA. The structure of which is very similar to other national and international models. What it does is it looks where people travel to and where they traveled, from and to, the modes of transport that they choose to take to get from their origin to their destination, and then looking at an assignment model to make sure that the road capacity is enough, that enough cars or buses, whatever it is, can use it. The public transport capacity is enough, as to is the walking and cycling. So by using this model, it would be based in a base year, which is at the moment would be 2016, because that's the last time we did the census. And soon enough, the NTA will be ramping up to redo this model and using the census data that was collected last year to calibrate a more up-to-date model. And the amount of analysis and the amount of data collection that's undertaken to facilitate this model is absolutely massive. And it needs to be, because big transport projects cost an awful lot of money. And we need to be as sure as we can be that the projects that we're going to construct will deliver for Ireland and for each of our cities. When looking at these models, we look at the capacities that are available. So this is a slide that's taken from an international conference on the different types of capacities that one would use for different modes of transport. And this is the key thing. On different corridors across our cities and across our country, when the capacity is allowed, then you build the bigger systems. So with up to 2,000 people per direction per hour, it's a bus system. Up and above that, over 3,500, you're looking at a bus rapid transit system. Then when you get into much higher numbers, around 6,000, 7,000 per direction per hour, you're looking at light rail, and then above that is metro. So those are, I suppose, the kind of hierarchies of interventions that we would plan for in that model, but also things that we would examine within the courses that I deliver at the master's level in Trinity. And then this model kind of shows the kind of destinations that we would look at. So it's a hierarchical probability model. And what the model does is it looks at the probability that you will travel, first of all, whether you will travel to a destination A or B. And then if you're going to travel to each of those destinations, what's the probability that you're going to take either or modes of transport? So by car, public transport, walk or cycle, park and ride. So there's millions of these probability equations embedded within the model, and it predicts how people travel on a given day by the different types of activities people engage in across the Greater Dublin area. So it's a really cool model to be able to have access to with the NTA, and there have been many research projects that have come out of the ability to use this model. But like with all models, it's only as good as the data that you put in. So this is the coverage of the Eastern Regional Model. As you can see, it covers all of the Greater Dublin area. It's a very dense network of roads, public transport links, walking and cycling. And by modeling and simulating these, we're able to ascertain what would happen if we did certain things. If we built a metro, what would happen? If we build another motorway, what would happen? And we're able to predict to a certain level of accuracy what would happen if these things were put in place. And on that, one of the things that we do is we look at travel times and destinations. So this is a screen grab from Saturn. And what Saturn here is looking at is the different demands across different links across the network. And it's pretty clear that you can see there, you've got the Lewis lines, you've got the Dart, and then you can see the thicker lines basically mean that there's more demand on those routes. This again is another piece of data from where they collect this information from. It looks at the AM and PM boardings across the Greater Dublin area to see where people are using public transport, and being able to then predict the usage and then provide the usage is one of the key things that the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy looks to do. And then, as I said at the start, the model is only as good as the data that you put into it. So you need to basically make sure what the model is doing is correct. So this then enters the stage of calibration and validation of the model. So you would look back to see, say, in 2011, when the model was estimated for 2016, what the predicted changes would be in terms of demand for transport. And data is collected then to see, well, you know, in 2017 or 18, when you do the calibration, did what we predict using the last model, did that work? Were we within certain thresholds? And this basically shows you some of the data collection points across the Greater Dublin area that's used to calibrate and validate the model. These are routes across the city that were used to estimate travel times, and travel times are estimated across the Greater Dublin area to make sure that the model is able to estimate what we predicted. And this is the last slide on this, and it looks at the observed values versus the model values to see, you know, did we get it right? Were we able to estimate what we wanted to in the model? And there's a huge document, if anybody is interested in it, on the validation and calibration of the model. And it's very interesting reading for somebody like me, but it should also give a lot of confidence into the modeling approach that's used in the city. And using all of this data, all of these vehicle kilometers traveled, the what ifs, if we build a metro, if we build a Lewis system, using that type of information, then we're able to estimate what the changes will be in emissions. So this is a slide that I put in, and it was part of the work. So this is Trinity. This is the current alignment for Metro Link. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will be able to see that the current alignment puts Metro right underneath the home of civil engineering in Trinity in the Simon Perry building. But this strategy was built upon those types of models by being able to predict what the demand will be. And the predicted demand is about 50 million people per year will go underneath the Simon Perry building using a metro system. And then finally, on the model, this was a piece of work that I was involved in with the NTA, and it was the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy, which was approved by the Minister, I think last week or the week before. And we modeled out to 2042. And the key requirement of that model was to reduce transport emissions by 51%. And that was achieved based upon the very, very ambitious strategy that was put out there in the strategy. So now on to some more of my research and back into Avoid, Shift and Improve. When you look at what's going to be delivered by each of these in the Climate Action Plan, Avoid is to achieve about 21% of emissions reductions, Shift about the same. Sorry, there's a typo there. And then Improve is over 50%. So in terms of Improve, the first thing I want to talk to you about is electric vehicles. And in the electric vehicle sphere, there's an awful lot of doubt. I have an awful lot of doubt as to whether we're going to reach our target of 1 million electric vehicles by the end of the decade. I'll put links into these live so that you can click into the papers. They're all available open access. But this is a paper that I published around this time last year with colleagues in Trinity. and in Queens, in Belfast, and it looked at the equity impacts of these electric vehicles. So what we did was we went back and we looked to see how many cars have been sold in Ireland. And if you look at that, we sell on average about 100,000 vehicles per year in Ireland. And that is, that's what the industry can take. That's how much the industry can sell on an annual basis. But if we are to look at what we need to achieve in terms of electric vehicles using a doubling of values year on year, this is what we need to achieve. We need to achieve much higher sales in electric vehicles. And between 29 and 30, we may need to sell 300,000 electric cars. All while this has been done, petrol and diesel cars are still being sold in Ireland. And petrol and diesel cars would have a lifespan of about 9 or 10 years. The Irish government have great ambition to ban the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. However, the EU are saying 2035, and the EU trump Ireland when it comes to competition law. So it will be 2035 if that's what the EU are saying. I suppose the point that I'm trying to make here is that in 2035, if we're still selling petrol and diesel cars, they're likely to be here into 2045, maybe even up as far as 2050, because cars that we're selling now are much better in terms of their reliability and they're lasting longer. So that's one of the issues. Putting all of your eggs in the basket of electric vehicles is perhaps not the most prudent thing to do. So in the research, one of the things that we looked at was we looked at where people were buying electric cars, and where they were buying these electric cars that they were getting domestic EV charging points fitted. And the map here you can see shows the clustering of these electric vehicle points in and around Dublin, the greater Dublin area, around Cork and Galway. And you can see this kind of concentration of electric vehicles in these points. Then the second map shows income. And you can see obviously that there's a very high correlation, and the paper proves that as well, that there's a high correlation between those that are purchasing these electric vehicles and income. You would probably say, yeah, well, of course, Brian, there's going to be a correlation. People that can afford brand new cars tend to earn more money. But about 10,000 euro of the price of that new car comes from the taxpayer. And how prudent is it, or how equitable is it for 10,000 euros worth of a grant to be given to somebody? And again, the paper shows this too, that is most likely to have a second car. And this is the second car that they tend to be using. This then, again, the same type of mapping, and it looks at the deprivation index, which is another index that's constructed from the census, and the census is able then to look at areas that are deprived across the country, and the same correlation here was found. So in terms of the research, one of the key things that we don't know about when it comes to electric vehicles and where they're going to be is where they're going to be charged and where they're going to live. In order for electric vehicle to be efficient, it needs to be charged overnight when we've got excess wind, and that's the optimal time to charge your electric vehicle. We don't have good data sets in Ireland on where people on whether or not people have driveways, and that was one of the key problems that we looked at in this piece of research that I'm going to talk to you about. This research is funded by Microsoft and SFI. It's a project called Terrain AI, and we're doing lots of kind of geospatial imaging and a lot of geospatial analysis to look at different aspects of climate. I should have put the link in, but it's, if you Google Terrain AI, we're across many other things other than mobility. There's lots of stuff in there about crops, and there's lots of stuff in there about forestry, and it's a really cool project with lots of open source data sets that you can use. So the purpose of this study was, this is Inchicore, to see in Inchicore, could we identify driveways based upon this type of spatial data. So what we did was working with our team in Trinity and the teams in Maynooth. They looked at this spatial data, and they looked using AI algorithms if they could identify driveways within these different regions, or within this region. Train the algorithm then to go search and see if it can find driveways everywhere else. There was lots of difficulties in this because driveways are, they can be hard to identify. Also, you've got people's front and back garden boundaries. Again, that's something that was difficult to do, but do it we did. And we're able to find the areas within this part of Dublin that have driveways, and you can see the false positives and the false negatives as well that we were able to identify in the areas. Again, then this slide shows the numbers of areas, the numbers of households in this area that have driveways. So then why is that important, other than the charging part? It's important because if you want to sell electric vehicles to people, they do need to have the ability to be able to charge them. So it's not only the driveway, we also looked at the demographics behind these people as well. And sorry, I'll skip on to that. And we look to see who were early adopters, who would need infrastructure, and who were likely to adapt it at a later stage. And this is based upon the demographics of the people, their age, their incomes, their occupations, as to whether or not they're likely to adapt, or they're likely to purchase an electric vehicle. So using this information, then we were able to extrapolate the numbers of people that would be able to buy them without any interventions in terms of charging and driveways and things like that. Then we looked at the adopters that would require infrastructure. So to find out where the people where they live that would need more on-street charging points. And we've developed this, was presented at the Transportation Research Board in Washington, DC in January, and we're hoping it's about to be published in a journal article as well, and we can share the results with anybody that's interested in this. But it was a problem for improving cars or selling more electric vehicles, and by finding out where people were parking, gave us a guide to see what could be done. So then to start to move on to avoid, and avoid is something that is kind of hard to do, asking people to reduce their transport trips by 20%. So this is an example of research that again was published last year with myself and a postdoc in the department, Anna, and we looked at the benefits of remote working hubs. Again, this paper is freely available online and in open access. So what these remote working hubs are, they're scattered across the country. We worked with a company called NOCO, and they provide these remote working hubs across Ireland. That map is maybe old now. I think that they've probably expanded even further than that. So the idea is you would drive to this hub instead of driving to your normal office or get to using public transport or whatever. Instead of your normal office, you would stay there, and it's flexible. You could work 2, 3, 4 days, one day, whatever a week it is from there. You get all the benefits of seeing your colleagues in an office setting. Also, if you're not set up at home for an office, that you don't have good Wi-Fi or desks or all those kind of things, that it kind of solves some of those issues. So we worked with them. We developed some surveys, and we surveyed their users. We surveyed the people that were using the NOCO remote working locations to find out, basically, first of all, the key thing was, is this saving emissions? This was done towards the end of 2021. So I would say the survey was put out maybe in, I think it was September, the survey was put out. So working from back in the office was starting to become a thing, but people, there's still the COVID thing to take into account as a caveat. So one of the key things we saw was that people save time. That was the biggest seller for people. They save a lot of time by not traveling into the city centre. The majority of people that we found in this were living in commuter belts around Dublin and around Cork, and they were traveling large distances either on public transport or by car to get to their locations. There's a much more digestible set of results here. One of the things, and this is something we're following up with the NTA on with more modelling, is 70% of people said they would consider moving if they could stay working in a remote working hub. There was talk of better, more time spent in their community. 80% of people said they would consider selling their car if they were able to do this. But the key one was in terms of emissions. On average, people could save 30% of their annual carbon footprint by doing this 3 days a week over a working year. It's not for everyone. Transport interventions aren't for everybody. This one isn't for everybody. Not everybody can do it, but there's a critical mass there that could enable people to do this, and a critical mass could then lead to substantial emissions reductions. And as I said, it's not a policy that it's a policy I support, and I think it's a really good idea. But I think it's got larger kind of implications. I think the emissions savings from it will start to dissipate as people start to buy more electric vehicles. But there are definitely short-term savings that could be achieved by looking at this type of policy. So then on to some of the final projects. This is one. Again, there's data available on this, and it's one of my postdocs in my group, Robbie Egan. And this is a really cool collaboration with Bleeper. Hopefully most people in Dublin know, or across the country now know, Bleeper. They provide floating bikes funded by Connect, Enable, SFI, and DLR. And we did a trial in Dunleary, giving companies access to these electric cargo bikes. The trial was expanded into Dublin as well. And over 6 months, we found substantial emissions reductions. We were looking at the factors that impact upon this. Obviously, rain and the terrain of the area have big impacts upon whether or not somebody's going to use one of these cargo bikes. But again, not being a silver bullet, but still it did show that there were the potential for substantial emissions reductions. And it's more of these types of projects, and the more mass you can get around them, then you can start to really chip away at the bigger 51%. This is the second project I want to talk to you about in terms of improve, and this is a project that Trinity are partnered with the ESB. It's part of an Interreg project, and there are other mobility hubs in the UK and across mainland Europe as well. And these bikes are set up that you would drive to them in an electric car, you would get your car to charge, and then you would take one of these bikes for the day into the city centre. The offering is a little bit more pricey than, say, the Bleeper or the Dublin Bikes offering, but this offering basically is that it's a drive and cycle. As you can see there, I think in the small little maps there that you can see the locations of where these are. So this is a 12-month trial, which is still underway. And again, with one of my postdocs, we're evaluating these. We're evaluating it to see what the potential emissions reductions are. It being a pilot, we probably won't get everything right, but there is funding hopefully in place to do this again, do it better, do it bigger, fail better on another option, another kind of project like this. But we are seeing really good results come out of this this mobility hub. And that brings me to the final slide, I think, which is again on mobility hubs, and it's part of another partnership that I have with the ESB. And the ESB are really taking this area of shared mobility quite seriously and want to be a big actor or a big provider in the area. And this shows an example of one of their large stations that are in planning. And there's a couple of funding sources that we've applied for to roll this type of thing out. And here you can see there's bikes, there's scooters, there's cargo bikes, there's shared electric cars as well. And the purpose of the research that we will do around these hubs is to see if people end up giving up their car, if they end up giving up their car and swapping over to these shared forms of mobility. And in these as well, you do have, it is the intention that they would interconnect with large public transport, with bus and with rail. It's kind of, when you're trying to chip away at a 51% target in 7 years, you kind of have to try everything. You have to shake the tree to see everything. And that's why, yes, electric cars, that tree has to be shaken as well to see how much of these emissions we can get down in the very tight time frame we have. So to conclude, is it mission impossible? I think under the current short time frame that we have to see large emissions reductions. It does seem like a very much an uphill battle, especially when you're seeing emissions increasing year on year, and they increased last year, and it's difficult to see progress. But I suppose they are increasing, but the population is also increasing. We're moving more, and emissions could be increasing by even greater values. Will we get there by 2030? I think, we really need to start to think about how we're going about this and the longer term systemic change that's perhaps needed. One of the things I worry about a lot in this plan is, where's the warning sign if we're on the wrong trajectory? Where's the ejector seat to say, look, this isn't working. We need to try something else. I've got concern over the dependence on electric vehicles, and we need to start to consider more charging and price and price changes that are needed around the electrification of the private fleet. And finally, like, one of the things I really do think is that we need to move away from this 1 million electric vehicle target. I think it's a distraction. I think it makes us feel we're doing something in the sector. Other sectors, say like energy or agriculture, don't have these types of big targets like this. Well, definitely not in agriculture. And we do need to, I think, move away from it. I would much rather see a target that said the number of kilometers of electric driven as opposed to the number of cars we sell. I think any subvention for EVs need to go to the right places. They're going to the wrong places at the moment. They're going to places where people have access to Dart and Lewis. I have an electric car. I have access to the Lewis, a really good bus service as well. I do think that the funding that's available for them should be better targeted. I think we need to expedite the delivery of public transport projects with much greater urgency. There are a number of large public transport projects that we have on the books, and they've been there for decades. There has been an element of paralysis by analysis in some of them, but the big ones like Metro Link, every single model that we've ever developed on that corridor has shown it needs a high capacity public transport option. Simon would have seen it in his day when he was looking at the models for that side of the city. Margaret would have seen it. Everyone that's looked at these models would have seen that this is this part of the city requires this. And then the last 2 points, I think we can learn an awful lot from the Welsh. The Welsh are doing fantastic work in climate change. They've brought in an ombudsman for the future, essentially, so that if government is making a policy, that it has to be future proofed, so future generations can have their say. Basically, they've stopped building new roads in Wales, and I think that's something we should look at. I think we should have the safest roads that are possible, but we need to really look at any new road investment. And then finally, and this was part of an OECD report that came out last year, another one that I was quite heavily involved in with as well. And the kind of key takeaway from that was that we need to reprioritize our urban areas towards more sustainable modes of transport, taking the space out that's been taken over by the car, and push much more sustainable modes of transport. And that is a report that anybody that's researching and working in the transport field and climate as well, it's a report that I would urge everybody to look at. If you just search OECD and Transport Review for Ireland, you should be able to find it. And that's from me. I'd like to thank everybody for their attention. John, I have no idea what time, but you haven't sent me a message to say I've gone over. So
no, I knew you were coming to a close. So it's only 2 or 3 minutes, Brian. So thanks for keeping so close to time. Thanks to those of you who've asked questions. My apologies sincerely to those of you who I couldn't get round to. But please do contact myself, and I'll have my slide just in a minute. If you want to contact me, I can pass on your queries to Brian with regards to unanswered items that maybe he's provoked a thought in you. So thank you to the over 200 of you who joined this afternoon. I suppose this climate action and sustainability series is very much linked to our sustainable Trinity focus, where our teaching and our research is all to do with this. Brian himself has contributes to a course focused on the Masters in Engineering focus on transport, but also delivers this micro-credential, which is like an individual standalone module looking at that kind of transport modelling that is so valuable to us in defining future strategies. And just maybe to highlight session number 2 next week, in this part 1 is another colleague in the School of Engineering, Professor Roger West. whose title was Cutting Concrete's Carbon, and a very topical item, and Professor West has worked in the area of concrete technology for many years, and will share his views on how the building sector, construction sector are embracing new technologies, new strategies to help reduce the carbon emissions associated with construction. Just to maybe comment that we will share a recording, and people have asked for the recording and also the slides. We'll get that to you in due course for anyone that is registered. And also please be aware that the other 3 sessions are there to register for, and the other subsequent 8 will be available soon. Please ensure that you register for the specific session to ensure that we share recordings, slides, etc. with you after, because it's not a one for all in terms of registrations, just because the topics are a little bit different and you may be more focused and interested in certain sessions as opposed to others. But I would encourage you to join us for all future sessions. All I can say, I suppose, to end today is thank you very, very, very much for joining. It was great to have such a wide audience and such engaged audience around questions. And again, apologies we couldn't get to everything. My details are at the bottom of this slide. If you have any further questions, happy to follow up with any of you. And I hope to see you next Wednesday. So thank you very much for joining. Have a good afternoon, and have a good day.